It's an Archaeodeath Interview with Professor Howard Williams and his guest. Welcome, Archaeodeathlings, to an Archaeodeath Interview with me, Professor Howard Williams, and another extra special guest, and now extra special because we're entering into the realms of heritage tourism. Grace, would you like to introduce yourself to our watchers and listeners?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Grace Rinehart Macrae. I am currently in my third year of pursuing my PhD in World Heritage and Archaeology, and my specific research focuses on the use of myth and legend in heritage tourism.
Oh, there's so many angles. We were trying to put together a list of questions, and about 50 other questions were going through my mind, having watched your TikToks and knowing some of your interests, including the worst things that tourists do around Europe. But I really wanted to get a sense of, before we get on to any particular topic, of just how did you get to where you are doing a third year of a PhD? I remember the horrors I was having at that point, but you're very brave, and you're still going strong. And but you know, how did you get here? What was your journey so far, so to speak?
Yeah, so I think I've had a very unconventional journey into archaeology. I am lucky in that when I was very little, we did a lot of traveling around Europe. And so I was introduced to medieval castles and architecture at a very young age. And I was obsessed from the very beginning. And then my dad showed me Indiana Jones, which is very cliche, and that kind of kicked everything off from there. I've always had that love of history and things. But I say unconventional because I actually didn't do an archaeology or history undergrad or anything. My undergrad background is in theater. So theater management and stage management is my undergrad background. And during COVID, I just said, look, I started applying for grad schools a couple of times, and I finally said, let's just jump into it. Let's just do it. So I applied to the master's program at University College Dublin, World Heritage Management and Conservation, got accepted. And after I completed that, my supervisor said, so shall we go on and expand this into a PhD? And I said, well, yeah, all right, let's do it. And so here we are, year 3, slowly descending into madness.
Well, I hope the descent is either complete or not at all, and you rise out of it. But I suppose if you are mad, you won't notice. So that's the way I look at it. That's the rest of my academic career. I'll just go, when did I start becoming this eccentric? Probably. But
from the beginning.
Yeah. But that is actually great, and it's a good another shake. I mean, one of the multiple functions of these interviews is showing people how the many routes into archaeology at different levels, and that's a really fascinating career or direction shift. And of course, COVID, as another instigator for people to sort of rethink where they are in many different regards. So what's the PhD's focus, may I ask? I know you're not finished it, and I'm not examining you, but where's it going? What's the angle?
Yeah, so it started out being something I think a bit more straightforward. The region I studied for my master's has so much content in such a small area. So I'm very specifically looking at Occitanie in the southwest of France, which in the medieval era used to be its own sort of autonomous region. So the kings of France and Aragon had suzerainty, but it was really ruled by the counts of Toulouse and Foix and Barcelona.
Oh.
And culturally, the Occitan people are different than the French or the Spanish. They're much more similar to the Catalan. And I was really interested because that's actually where I quarantined for most of COVID. So I had it right at my fingertips. And the more I looked into it, the more I was like, more people should know about this place because it's absolutely got an insanely fascinating history. But what really kind of ticked the box and pushed me forward into this kind of heritage tourism, culture identity landscape, really, of memory and remembrance is what I should be saying my main focus is that in 2016, France redistributed a lot of its regions, and they allowed the people of the region to choose their own name. And this region overwhelmingly voted to go back to the name Occitanie, which harkens back to that time before they became a part of France, before the Albigensian Crusade, when they were an Occitan people, not a French people.
So this is yet another, I mean, my geography and history of France is sketchy to say the least, but my take on this is you know, and you can correct me if this is really getting the point right. It's like England is many regions that deny being part of England at every opportunity, just as well as the various other, you know, nations that are part of the UK. You know, so there's, you know, I've passionate discussions of Lancashire identity, Yorkshire identity, but France even more so, right? And frankly, language, culture. You know, France is you know. I know we had that debate on TikTok. I try to not involve myself in it. Of, oh, there's no diversity in Europe. They're all tall white people. But you know, as a characterization of, but you know, it's another region that is into that homogenous. From external perception, it's just another part of France. But internally, they see themselves very differently. Correct me if I've got the wrong end of the stick.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely. I think when we think of France and sort of pulling away from that French nationalism, you look to Brittany and places like that in the Celtic area. But then down in the southwest, it's in the Pyrenees and along the Mediterranean. So right along the border with Spain, it's a completely different language and culture of people that have been there since, you know, their history, they would say, goes back to the Visigoths and the Merovingians and things like that. And it's a completely different language and culture. And a lot of the culture has been appropriated by the French and presented as their own, which is why I really wanted to shed light on the Occitan culture in this kind of landscape of remembrance that I'm doing.
So is it exoticized and co-opted by the French, or is it just co-opted? Is it sort of, how does it play out?
Well, the real kicker there is when Eleanor of Aquitaine married the King of France, and she brought with her the courtly love and these troubadours and things. These are all Occitan ideas, because Eleanor was never French. She was Poitevin. She was Occitan, which is all comes from that sort of Languedoc southern identity. So because she brought it to France, apologize for my cats sprinting around in the background. If you hear any noise, it's them. She brought this differing identity to France, these new kind of ideas of love and romance and courting each other, and the French latched onto it. And in the end, it just never really got separated again. And I would blame the Albigensian Crusade for that as well, because it once again wrapped them up in that bubble of France. And then as soon as other French authors started publishing this courtly love poems and becoming troubadours, then it sort of became a French thing instead of an Occitan thing.
So while you have that part absorbed into the Roman Empire, breakup of the Western Roman Empire backstory, you're really looking at the remembrance and connections to that later, what I would call later medieval origin story. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such an important moment in history, because it's when this group of people went from being their own autonomous, really forward-thinking set of people. In Languedoc, the Occitan people, you know, they educated women almost as equally as men. When you passed away and your lands were divided, a woman could inherit it, didn't have to go to a man. And they kind of had a little bit of forward-thinking equality about them that the rest of Europe hadn't quite latched onto. And when it came to religion as well, they were incredibly religiously tolerant. They allowed Jews and Muslims and Catholics and other varieties of Christians to live alongside one another, really, as long as you were paying your taxes. They didn't care. Whatever you wanted to do.
A great equalizer.
Exactly.
So how's that then working out in terms of the things you're looking at, the kind of material side of things? You know, is it the tangible versus intangible? How are you pursuing it? How are you approaching this?
There's so many different ways, and that has been the biggest. I know it's been the biggest problem, because I've had 3 years and I'm really trying to narrow it down into that pinpoint. So the two ways I'm doing it are I'm looking at the more intangible side of things with the myths and the legends, because we have the Cathars, that religious heretical sect that came over from Italy, kind of swooped down through France and northern Spain. And they found a foothold in Occitanie because of the religious tolerance. And a lot of those kind of more equal between men and women thoughts sort of align, even though they were for very different reasons. And from there, it just sort of grew into this thing. The Cathars became a heresy which became an excuse for the Pope and the King of France to kind of go gobble up the bits of Occitanie, take them under the French umbrella. And in the end, it sort of became the start of the Occitan genocide. We're looking at somewhere in a 20-year span between 200,000 and 1 million people, it's estimated, were killed for heresy, or for being Occitan and refusing to acknowledge the King of France as their rightful overlord. Depends on who you're reading.
Wow, that
direction it goes.
I have no idea about that scale of.
Yeah. It's the only crusade ever launched against fellow Christians. So every other crusade, obviously, generally happens in the Middle East, the Holy Land, things like that. But this one, it's in France. It's in a country that I think most of us would think of as a primarily Catholic Christian country. And here goes the Pope inviting people to come and make war against these people, who, some of whom were still Catholics. Some were Catholic, some were Cathar. But I mean, the principle of it all, we're still looking at the same God. We're still looking at a lot of the same scriptures and things. The difference was, and I'll give them this, it is a bit odd, the Cathars believed that humans on Earth were in purgatory, and you had to ascend to the highest level and be released from your human form, and you would become a genderless angel, which is one of the reasons why they promoted equality between men and women. It didn't matter, because once you were released from your physical form, you were an angel at the side of the Lord once again. So it is a bit odd, but in general, they were very peaceful people. They were not going around causing too much trouble, I think.
They had it coming for them then, didn't they, by being peaceful, in the Middle Ages in Europe.
In the 1200s.
What were they thinking? No, but seriously, it's a terrible, brutal period, but it's cast a long shadow, obviously, over the region and their identities, and that's coming out through the myths and the legends. And
so there's so many myths about the Cathars, legends that have been passed down. A big one is this thought of a Cathar treasure that they had with them and carried from place to place. And depending on, again, who you read, maybe it's just a lot of gold, maybe it's the Holy Grail, maybe it's the Ark of the Covenant, and a few of them hid it, and so now people have been looking for it. So we have records of people searching for this in the 1500s, 1700s, 1800s. In 1891, excuse me, a priest in a very small village, Rennes-le-Château, discovered something. We don't know what it is, but he discovered something that allowed him to begin making unprecedented repairs to the village and his church. And decided to put in a lot of really interesting sculptural details, which people then decided meant that he had discovered the Cathar treasure and was not sharing and was spending it on his own parish. How dare he?
God, the standard rivalries and paranoias of humankind come forth.
Exactly. So it's from this legend that we get things like the Da Vinci Code. Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which then sponsors the Da Vinci Code, and then we get people coming in with metal detectors and digging holes in the church and cutting off the head of the devil inside the church because they think that it has some sort of esoteric meaning, and they will discover the one Holy Grail at the end of this.
Is this recent?
2018. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a cultural. There's the, oh my God, there's so many angles. I see. I'm starting to begin to see the fascination and horror both of what you're doing. So you're getting this kind of rash of pseudo archaeology, spiritualism. Yeah, I mean, it's all material. It's intangible, but it's materially, grounded in place architecture and stories of hidden treasure and stories of hidden codes.
Yeah, it's absolutely mad. And yet, so archaeology has actually been banned in the commune of Rennes-le-Château since 1965. So if there was anything else there, we can't go in and find out.
Banned. All banned. Archaeology by research institutions.
Nothing can go in there. Nothing. There was one illegal exception made by the mayor when he asked a team, I think it was from Milwaukee, to come in and do a GPR scan. of the floor of the church, and they did find that there's a lower level to the church, and there's more stuff down there, but the French government shut them down, and so we have nothing aside from that. Yeah.
Only make the conspiracy theories version.
Exactly.
We all know there's a big warehouse with the Ark of the Covenant in it. We all know. We've seen the film.
The aliens and everything. Speaking of, there are aliens involved as well now.
Always involved.
There's always an alien. So it's just, it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff.
So you're like kind of charting the biography of these myths, and is that what you're doing? Is that how you're doing it? Taking it by place or by theme or?
Yeah, so I have I've picked like the top 3 or 4 places that are really affected by this in any way. And so I'm kind of taking a chart of the myths and legends from the time of the Crusade, a little bit before, up to how it's perceived and presented in the modern era. And the catch with that as well is that some of the sites, the castles in the region, have been marketed as Cathar castles. And they've been marketed as Cathar castles since the 90s. And in the early 2010s, they decided, well, do you know what? Let's go ahead and hold for cat scratching.
That's great. That's or is it a Cathar cat? They can no smoke without fire.
Never know. Are you done?
We've got to keep that in. It's fantastic.
He's a black cat as well, so maybe he just wants to distract me from telling the myths.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Where was I? Oh, Cathar castles. So they're being packaged for UNESCO nomination. So they're currently on the tentative list. And now I'm kind of looking at that from is this wise perspective? Because we have all of these myths and legends, and a lot of them are associated with the castles that are going on this list, including the Chateau of Montségur, which was the last stand of the Cathars, where supposedly they had the Ark of the Covenant, and then it was taken away from there, and the Cathars surrendered and were burned en masse in the field below.
Oh, wow.
But archaeology is banned there as well, because again of the issues with people treasure hunting and looking for mystical things that we have no evidence of.
Metal detecting's legal in France, isn't it? Or it's heavily restricted?
It is. It's legal. It's pretty restricted. You should get a permit, but if it's on your land, then there's nothing really stopping you from doing it.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I wasn't quite sure on that, because I was having a discussion with another archaeologist who were talking about the disparity between different parts of Europe and metal detecting reporting, and I couldn't remember where France sat in that.
Yeah, they're a little bit more liberal on the end. Here in Ireland, where I am now, it is just blanket. Absolutely not. Can't do it. If you find anything with it, it's just, you have to get so many permits. So many permits. So now there's this World Heritage kind of angle to things as well, that it's all just so much. I'm going to have to write so many books at the end of this to try and get all of it out there. So we have the intangible kind of myth and legend heritage. You have the actual physical built heritage that is left. And then you have this idea of World Heritage and memory and how this place is being remembered and presented, which I feel like that gif of the guy on the board with all of his red twine trying to pull things together to make sense.
So you're actually worrying about whether World Heritage status could actually create a whole new set of problems for the region rather than advantages in terms of economy and so on.
Right, because on the one hand, all of the myths and things that do draw people in, it's a boost for the economy. That's great. I don't necessarily want to end that. It's such a fine line between allowing for these ideas to kind of be present and be appreciated, and the proper history, the actual fact that we know, to be forgotten or trampled. And
I don't want to detract too much, but one thing that does make me, I'm not coming strongly on one way or the other, but I've always found it a bit galling to see when English Heritage did try to open up Tintagel officially branding the myths and legends in relation to the archaeology, and the archaeological community in the UK went absolutely, without over exaggerating, absolutely apeshit at English Heritage for doing that. And then, but then the other side I see is that you go to Tintagel village and it's not English Heritage that have been stacking it full of Merlin cafes and Arthurian souvenirs. That's Cornish local businesses doing that. You can't. So while I understand the frustrations, it's been 100+ years of tourism and interacting with the local economy that's created all that, and it seems a bit rich for everyone to suddenly start dumping on English Heritage for just mentioning that this is purported to be, so I found myself sort of actually for once agreeing with English Heritage, or at least sympathizing with them when that happened, because I thought it's a bit, I mean, frankly, I think it would really just add controversy to everything. I think they should Merlin should be branded on everything, really, including Stonehenge, just because that'll make so much hate that everyone will forget about roads and everything else that they want to argue about these landscapes. But no, I suppose my connection is you have these medieval sites that have a branding that can be engaging, it can open up to new audiences, but if there's already, if it's going to just create 50,000 Cathar tea shops and Cathar, experiences, heritage experiences with mannequins talking at you in various languages or whatever, I don't know. Is there anything? I mean, it's not there yet, maybe. I mean, that's the route that's going to happen.
You never know. There are some places in Carcassonne where you do get the mannequins already. They're all dressed in Knights Templar gear because, of course, they have to be part of this. Just like you do, don't you? Can you get out of the way? Thank you. The Knights Templar, just like my cat. Anyway, so yeah, we do have some mannequins in Carcassonne talking about the Museum of the Inquisition, the Museum of Torture, and using the Cathar sort of tragedy as a selling point for selling things, really.
And in this case, it's and just because this links into sort of not segueing fully, but just moving towards death and memory specifically, is the memory of this about the memory of the gruesome torture, the stories associated with, is it all about the heritage tourism, or is it almost dark tourism, I suppose is what I'm asking. I mean, I don't know, I'm not up on all the definitions of dark tourism, but are we into that realm? Are we into that grisly fascination with mass death?
We're getting close to it, if we're not there already. It's pretty close to it. There are, I've seen at each site that I've been to, there are people who leave their own sort of trinkets and memorials to people. So very frequently people will bring flowers, they'll bring candles, saints' cards or stones, and they'll put them on wherever the altar would have been in the castle. Sometimes the altar is still there, sometimes it's been destroyed. And then at Montsegur in particular is interesting because we have this mass burning on record, and we know so much detail about that day that we know what the weather was like, and we know how they would have died. We know that they would have asphyxiated before they burnt because of the weather conditions, to the point where if you go there, you have to kind of confront that idea because it's right there, and they have a stone memorial there as well, which is always full of dried flowers and candles and things. So if it's not quite to the level of what people would consider dark tourism yet, it's certainly on the path to it as they move forward with this UNESCO thing and talk more about what happened during the Crusade.
Are these memorials to the mass event or to particular personalities, or are people affining with a particular story of a young girl or an old man, or a particular holy, or is it just the mass violence?
For the most part, it's the mass violence. Some people who've done a little bit more research or who are maybe local would be familiar with the story of Esclarmonde de Foix, who was one of the noble women. She was the sister of the Count of Foix, And she actually became a Cathar later in her life. So we're not necessarily looking at a young girl, but a woman in her 50s who actually was on, there was a panel, a debate between the Catholics and the Cathars in 1207 to determine whether or not the Cathars would be allowed to continue. And she stood up and debated against St. Dominic. And she was one of the few women on the panel. And he told her basically to go back to the kitchen and do her duty. So she's a character that pops up quite frequently. The Viscount Raymond Roger de Tronquevel in Carcassonne is very well remembered. He was a young man. He was killed suspiciously in the dungeon by the Crusaders after Carcassonne fell. So you get a few names like that, but for the most part, it really is remembrance of the Cathars as this sort of nebulous people and the violence that was done to them.
And this fire motif, is that evoked in art or in the space in any way? Because of course we have so many modern era anxieties about mass death by fire linked to the 20th century's gruesome history in Europe. You know, is how does that play out in any way?
Yeah, there's not a lot of fire at the sites. You'll see a mention sometimes of people being burned on a pyre, but there's no art or anything kind of commemorating that at the sites. I've seen later interpretations and even medieval text interpretations of the Cathars on fire. But yeah, at the sites themselves, not a lot of mention of it.
It's more just the space with the ruins and the medieval surviving traces. It's just the space that is the place of remembrance. Yeah,
exactly.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. I mean, so in relation to this modern devotional, is it almost pilgrimage, the modern votives? This is something that's fascinated me, but because people are so snobbish about it, and yet it is clearly an important way in which people are, connecting to places. And I've seen it sort of played out in the news, everything from Diana's death through to horrible Madeleine McCann and people co-opting sacred spaces for generic or national stories, but also, and for the COVID dead with stones, but also for specific places, specific stories. I'm just, what's your take on it all, and how does it? Is it in one location at your sites, or is it diffused? Are people just making stuff up and creatively using whatever niche they can? I mean, how does it work?
You kind of have a little bit of both, honestly, because you have the people, the local people, and the ones who are familiar with the sites and the story, sort of leaving these flowers, these little offerings and candles and things at the altars. But then you also have people who believe in the much more esoteric side of things, and they sort of create their own locations of importance and leave their own sort of votive pieces at that site. We had, to the point the French government got involved with some things back in 2012, because there was a group of about 10,000 people who'd flocked to one mountain, which is in view of Rennes-le-Château, because they believed in the Mayan end of the world. And they thought that the aliens and the Cathars would come down and save them if they were on that mountain during the end of the world. So the French government dispatched the military to make sure that there wasn't going to be mass suicide and things like that. It was a huge issue. It's a village of 200 year-round occupants, suddenly with 10,000 people, not to mention the journalists and everything else.
And no one knew exactly what they were going to do, and the possibility of some kind of mass behaviour that could have caused. I mean, just think of football crowds. There's a crowd management issue there, isn't there? Stampedes and all the type of things that police worry about and sometimes get terribly wrong. God, that's really
so it goes both ways. You have the little things that I would kind of perceive as normal, and things that are very similar to what I see here in Ireland as well. At certain cairns or portal tombs, people will leave flowers or things like that. But then you also have, on this other end, this wildly sort of unpredictable behavior of people who believe in the Holy Grail and the esoteric nature of it all, which makes my job even harder.
Are you recording that as part of your doctoral research, or is that more of a sideline?
I am recording it. I don't know exactly where it's going to fit in, but I want to have it all recorded so that if I do kind of push that part forward, that that I have that already. So I always, whenever I see any of those behaviors or anything left, I always take photos and keep it, record when and where and what day, to see if there's like a day in particular that they'll come out and leave things, or if it's just when they're there.
It's a fascinating thing, because I've heard, just in conversation with people, as I said, I come across many dismissive attitudes to it, calling it litter and ritual litter, and and I do understand that attitude, but equally, and also and this is a very British thing that maybe not, maybe part of a anti-Catholic British thing and anti-Irish, is that sort of, oh, it's a Catholic thing, and if it's a prehistoric monument, oh, it's neo-pagans, but they're just copying Catholics. They're making it doubly dirty. And I try to sort of gently and sometimes robustly counter those views when I hear them from people, because I think this is now such a, whatever one's views on organized religion, this is has many different strands of origin, doesn't it? I mean, there is a Christian tradition of this. There's a Jewish tradition of stones. There's I find it very difficult. I had a TikTok argument with various people about this in relation to the Culloden battlefield and other Outlander tourism sites. And I was I wasn't trying to defend, damage and desecration, but I remember digging at the Clava Cairns near Culloden when I was a student at Reading back in the 90s, and people were arguing about New Age weirdos, they were calling them, not my word, but just desecrating sites then, and that's long before Outlander. So I think people may be wrapping in and blaming fans of a TV show for all manner of long-term deep practices. I don't know what you're feeling, maybe I've got it wrong, but I don't think there's one, you can't just package this as one kind of people doing this, can you?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. And I have my own issues with film and TV tourism.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the time, I really think that it's detracting from the actual peoples and histories and cultures that are there, especially Croatia. Port Dubrovnik has got it just the worst, the absolute worst of people going and just wanting to see the Walk of Shame and nothing else, really. They want to go to King's Landing.
I mean, that does get me angry. Don't get me wrong. I don't for those listening. This does not get me angry. Yeah, I mean, the idea that you go all that way, spend all that money just to. I mean, maybe. Oh, that's interesting. And people have done that to me. I've gone back, and some local guys go, and do you realise this is where they filmed the film? So I go, whatever, But people actually go there for that alone, and that's it.
Absolutely, they go there for that alone. And I mean, I had a friend who was visiting me recently, and we went up to Belfast, and she took one of those Giant's Causeway day trips. And when she came back, she reported to me, she said, I don't feel like I learned any history of the North or of Ireland or of anything that I saw here, because wherever we stopped, there were signs about Game of Thrones, but there weren't signs about the village or the Dark Woods or anything like that. And I feel like in some places we're overcorrecting and forgetting about the history and saying, well, this will make money, so this is what we have to push. And money is great. The boost of the economy, that's great. I'll never begrudge that, the local peoples, wherever in the world. But you have to also think, I mean, in a way, with the Rennes Chateau and everything, my case study is almost, this is what could happen to you. Archaeology could get banned if you don't think about this and the level of impact it has on the sites and the people and the culture and the history. I just think that a lot of people are running ahead with the money that you can get from the tourism and not thinking about the long-term implications that we're already seeing in the southwest of France.
And this hasn't even had a Ridley Scott movie starring Orlando Bloom or Joaquin Phoenix. And so many possibilities. No.
We had Tom Hanks though, so.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, okay. So we have. We need a reboot, because Hollywood seems to be doing reboots every 2 years. There should be a new version of something. Hadn't we just seen a film about the Fantastic Four? Oh, there's another one now with completely different actors and completely different, or whatever it may be. But okay, sorry, I'm going off. But so death and memory are linked into this in a sense. Remembrance acts and various legends. I mean, is there anything else you'd like to talk about, your specific research that you think we should share or discuss? Or I was going to ask you, because I was going to move on to more broader issues about death and memory and heritage, but I don't want to sort of sell short what your current interests and worries are about this whole topic.
No, I'm kind of in a holding pattern with it at the moment. I'm about to do. I've just gotten ethics approval from the university to go out and actually do a survey of people to kind of get a local idea of what they really think, not just what I've seen, but to hear from the people who are living it day to day, you know, what they feel about it. And if it's something that kind of comes back and the general local feeling is it's fine, it's harmless, then I could definitely see my PhD taking a little bit of a turn here and there. But it is something that I kind of want to get local sense of before I move forward, if that makes sense.
I mean, absolutely. Given how polemic these cultural appropriation tourism issues can be with, and rightly so, but you don't want to be, I suppose you don't want to be driving a narrative that actually they're not worried about.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And you may have that expert perspective already from elsewhere. You could say, you don't know what's coming, but,
Yeah, and I mean, I go down, my family lives there, so I go down and I spend a month or two every year at least. And I go to these sites and I talk to the local people. And so I feel like it's from them that I even got started on this path in the first place. Okay. But I want it written down. I want actual concrete evidence of this, not just my anecdotal, you know, sitting in a cafe overhearing people or being brought a book. At one point I was in a cafe with my mother and a man approached us. We didn't know him. He sat down, he looked at me dead in the eye and he said, "You know about Nostradamus." And he pulled a book out of his pocket about Nostradamus's prophecies and he slid it across to me. And he just said, "You've been here before," and got up and walked away. And it's one of the many baffling things I should have said that have happened to me while I'm down there. Another woman tried to set me up with her son because in a previous reincarnation, we'd been married and we were all Cathars together. So she really wanted me to come down and meet him. Never mind that I was sitting next to my current husband.
Well, he can be God, right? Let's get
you don't know who he was in a previous life. He might not have been a Cathar. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the results of this survey are. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, my mind has been blown, and I don't feel I've even heard the start of it. Really, it seems like so many layers to this. I
talk for hours.
It sounds like it is. It's more of a mystery than you know the books and films based on it. You know, it sounds fascinating. And you know, so I mean, how does this fit into this broader heritage tourism of death and memory then? Because this is something I've dabbled with a bit as I've been to Holy Wells, like Winifred's Well and North Wales, and you know, going to various archaeological sites and coming across, you know, people's interest in it from a religious perspective, or you know, people leaving ash scatterings and flowers and stones. I mean, I'm just really fascinated how you see it fitting in, because you said it's not dark tourism yet. I mean, I'd love to hear your take on what the broader sort of heritage tourism of death and memory involves. If there is, I don't think there's even an academic article dedicated to that I've found called the death, you know, heritage tourism, death and memory. But I just wondered whether you had any thoughts on that area, you know, of it's contemporary archaeology, it's a bit of, well, in your case, medievalism and medieval studies, and there's different, everyone's interested in it, you know, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts were.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am working on an article a little bit like that, so hopefully I'll find someone to publish it soon. The article I'm working on is a direct comparison between two sites in this region. So I'm looking at Montségur, where you have the monument, you get offerings, you get people coming specifically for this, these burning fields is what they're called, to kind of to remember and share their own feelings about it. And then you have a town called Béziers, which was the site of a horrific massacre about 20 years before Montségur, where it's estimated around 7,000 people were killed. It's where we get the phrase, "Kill them all, God will know his own." So the Crusaders asked, how will we know who's Cathar, who's not? The bishop said, I've
heard this one, yeah.
Get them all. It won't really matter then. But if you go to Béziers and you're looking for any kind of memorial, it's not there. There's one small sort of circular stone on the ground that has the year of the massacre inscribed on it next to a church where a lot of people were murdered. But then you have nothing else. So it's an interesting kind of view on on the dark tourism versus the how are these people being remembered. So that's the example I'm kind of using at the moment. But you can also look at, in Paris, you get a ton of dark tourism with the catacombs. And then do we consider it dark tourism when people are going to kiss Oscar Wilde's grave? Or is it just morbid tourism? Or
yes,
do you know what I mean? Like, how do you qualify dark tourism? How much death has to be involved, or how much horror has to be involved?
I have a friend who's doing a blog about Sylvia Plath's grave, and it's not dark tourism so much as literary not tourism. And tourism perhaps isn't the word, but pilgrimage, or it's every pilgrimage is a subset of tourism, I guess, and tourism is a subset of pilgrimage in a sense. But I don't really understand the there's always a spiritual. But if people leaving pens on her grave, and it just made me think about yes, it's with an individual person's grave, whether it's Marx or Jim Morrison or whatever it may be, or we are looking at this intersection between it's very much more personalized, isn't it? But whereas it's so many, it links in film tourism, because then if there's a film done, that there's an angle that people want to go there because they think it's not Jim Morrison, it's Val Kilmer, they're really connecting fire or whatever it may be, so it's fascinating, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I mean, like I said, I could talk for hours about this kind of thing, but that's one of the things that I'm really interested in kind of defining along the way. Maybe not necessarily in my PhD, but as a sort of future thing, is what is the dark tourism line? When is it dark tourism? When is it just, memorial pilgrimage?
Because in the case of the second site, I forgot the name, sorry, where you say there's just a stone. It's almost, I mean, it's not so fast to say that's a deliberate amnesia, a deliberate forgetting, is it? Because they are marking it, but they're not allowing it to get, they're controlling it in a sense. They're not allowing it to, escalate, snowball, so to speak. Is that, do you think what's going on?
Yeah, I think that might be part of it. I think, there's a lot of shame and regret involved with what happened there. And I think a lot of people aren't really familiar with it. So in a way, they're marketing it as this beautiful Mediterranean town with a gorgeous beach. And, the churches are beautiful. I mean, it's an absolutely stunning place to go. So and people, I would say, don't tend to go there because of the massacre. And so they're trying to market without actually taking away from the current tourism. Whereas at Montségur, people go there for the murders and the death, and not necessarily the cool
So some
castle.
places it's almost, that story is a threat to a cozy, timeless idyll, Arcadian, whatever you want to call it, a timelessness.
Right.
Where, that's really interesting, isn't it?
They want people to go to Mirepoix for the market, not because of the fact that the town was razed to the ground and had to be rebuilt. They want people to go to Esperanza for the market, not because the name literally translates to this is a place to be raised. It's again, a whole nother level.
There's different forces at work behind the scenes of those that want to make something of this tragedy and these myths and these, well, not to say they didn't happen, but myths in the sense of perpetuating stories and a culture, but then there's also people who want to go, no, that's not something we want to make a big deal out of. Fascinating. So what do you think? I'm interested, Grace, in what you think, how this relates to the broader fields of what we're studying, because I don't even know what field you're in, but it's so many wonderful overlaps. And that's I mean that in a nice way. I meant it in a nice way, because I think it's that. Do you feel that this kind of research is at the beginning of a process, or do you feel we're building on some key influential studies? I mean, because I don't know, perhaps just my limitations of knowledge of how to characterize this, but I think it's so fascinating. But I mean, do you think this is entering a new field of interdisciplinary studies in some way? Because it does seem to.
Yeah, I think in some way it definitely can be sort of a combination of a bunch of different things. I've definitely, when I'm looking at literature and reading things over, I'm straying from just archaeology or just heritage. It's an anthropological thing overall as well. I guess maybe it's more of an anthropological study than an archaeological study, but So it's, yeah, I honestly don't know what to call myself either. Half the time I'm like, I'm an archaeologist, and half the time I say, I'm a heritage specialist. But so I think it kind of has roots in stuff that's already being done. If you look at, the study of folklore, because if you really kind of go out of yourself and think about it, what is TV and film if not modern myth and legend? So in a way, I think we've kind of already got a jumping off point for it, but it is interesting at how quickly it's moving now with social media and streaming and all of that being tied into tourism. So I think in a way, I'm kind of blazing a small new trail, but I think it's kind of in the shadow of something, or kind of leading off from something that's pretty well established already.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us, Grace, about your research or broader perspectives you think is important? Obviously, I know your TikToks, you've been ranging over many topics, including the damage that tourists do across Europe and beyond. I mean, you're not doing a how do we protect this? That's not primarily what your research is about. It's not about sort of management. It's about but heritage crime, accidental or deliberate, is part of this remit, isn't it? Is the potential. The more exposure these sites get, the more potential damage they have. But anyway, sorry, I was going off in a tangent. But is there anything else like that you'd like to share with us?
Oh boy. This is where I lose my mind and I can't think of anything to actually say.
Probably because I didn't really ask a proper question, but can I just ask then about this? I should have asked about this damage to sites. I mean, more broadly, and what do we do? Because I sometimes feel with archaeologists and heritage people, when we're on social media, we can become a broken record of here's people looting, here's people cultural appropriating, here's another army blowing to smithereens, not only people, but a 10,000-year-old, whatever, 100-year-old. I feel it's very easy to. I find myself trying to balance that up with, hey, and here's something fun. Here's a fun fact about the 14th century or whatever.
Right.
And so, I mean, I don't know. How do we operate how do we advocate for responsible engagement with the past in whatever form it may be, tangible or intangible, do you think?
Yeah, it's not easy. And I think, with the world of social media and the way that things are changing so quickly and the people's attention spans, that we do as archaeologists on TikTok, we can come across as a little bit preachy and, like you said, a broken record with things. But I think, honestly, it will start when people start understanding why that we're asking them to do this, why we're asking you not to deface the Colosseum. To us, it's so just obvious. Like, we know you shouldn't do this, but a lot of people, I think, probably don't know why, or maybe don't understand the significance of some things. So I have been very slowly on my platform because as you probably have found from talking to me, I can't just pick one thing. I have to do a little bit of everything. I've started kind of very slowly advocating for this idea of slow tourism, of really researching where you're going before you go there, because what if it's not for you? Sometimes things just aren't for you, and that's okay. I feel like we need to take away, de-influence people from this idea of bucket lists and checking off a place that I've been or a thing that I want to do, because maybe that's not for you. If you don't want to put the time and effort into the research of it, maybe you shouldn't go there. There's a lot of different places around the world that are suffering from people.
I'm not very well traveled, but I've never had a bucket list, and I've never understood that concept. And even when it was explained to me, I just went, I just don't understand. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's loads of places I neither have the money nor time to go to, and I feel great sadness and regret. But it's not to be grinning in front of yet another I feel like I could spend a lot of money and end up very miserable. You're spending a dreadful day getting ill with a stomach ache, looking at half a monument that's actually closed because I didn't check that it was whether it was open or not. That kind of thing. I could imagine spending a lot of money you're wasting on bucket lists, and
that's the other thing as well, is travel is so expensive. So why are you just rushing into this quick tour of, I'm going to be here for a day and then a day and then a day, when instead you could save your money, put the effort in to figure out where you really want to go there, enjoy it, come back with the memories, and feel that it's money well spent, instead of, I work at a museum. I work at the National Famine Museum here in Ireland with the Irish Heritage Trust. So obviously, you know, remembrance and things like that gets smacked in my face every day. But we get reviews sometimes of people who didn't feel like the experience of coming to the Famine Museum was worth it. And to them, I ask, well, then why did you come? We're not easy to get to. Like, you're out in the middle of nowhere in Ireland, but you made the effort to come here because you felt like you had to, because you had a great something maybe who came from Ireland, maybe nothing to do with the famine. But you see a lot of reviews like that on like TripAdvisor or whatever, saying the Colosseum was too crowded. I couldn't actually see anything. Or the biggest letdown is the Mona Lisa. It's a tiny painting. Yeah. You have to stand in line for ages. So why are you going there? Are you there because you want to appreciate the masterpiece? Or are you there because, well, I've seen the Mona Lisa, I can tick it off? So I'm really, and going forward, I have some more content planned about how to kind of encourage people to do slow tourism and think about where you're going instead of rushing in for the picture for Instagram.
That's very interesting, because we've been talking about dark tourism, and I'd forgotten that aspect that you work at the Famine Museum. I haven't actually been there. Obviously, I've been to Ireland a number of times, but I haven't been there. But the idea, I'm slowly processing that you'd go there and leave comments like too much. And I'm sure people don't. You probably get occasional comment, too much famine, or didn't really cheer me up, or things like that. But you know, honestly, you know, you do wonder whether people have thought it through at all.
Yeah, you really do. Like, I get some people coming out and they're crying and they're devastated, and it's, you know, washed over them what's happening, and it's a good moment to kind of talk things through with them and be like, you know what, but now you know, now you've been and you understand, and you can kind of go forward with that idea. And then I have people who come in and are furious that the tour of the big house, the Palladian mansion we have on the grounds, has already gone for the day, and they really just wanted to see the house. They didn't want to see the Famine Museum, which is baffling to me, that you just want to go into the house and not go to the site of the museum next door, which is, I don't know, a lot of people died due to the people in the big house. Like,
these are part of a story. You know, there's Well, I don't know the details. I'm just just guessing. You
can't pick and choose tragedy, you know, and remembrance like that. I just feel.
And decorum is decorum, but also performance for social media. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, rather than people, we were thinking about this before, weren't we, about how rather than opening up people to a sense that they're being scrutinized, literally every time they scratch their backside, they might be, you know, humiliated on social media. Rather than that, people are actually, at least a fraction of people are so comfortable with being constantly videoed that they will do these things, and they know, and if it goes viral, you know,
they'll turn around and smile for the camera because they're so excited to think, oh, viral moment. Maybe I'll be famous from my viral moment. Like,
So social media is part of the problem, but it's also maybe in some small way it's a niche where we can try to educate with, maybe. Hopefully.
I think we can. You know, I work with the Humanities Guild as well. And a lot of what we're doing there is, one, making sure that the people who are trying to educate are safe online. And we've had a lot of members who've had issues with things like that, with safety and you know, being threatened. So giving people the tools to cope with that kind of thing, as well as ways to educate people in a way that is approachable. It is something that people will actually be able to engage with, and it's not just an immediate hate comment. It's oh, that's interesting. I'd never thought of it like that. I'd like to know more. We're organizing a session at the European Archaeologists Association in Rome this summer. So
oh, nice.
We're hoping to get more people kind of talking about how we can use digital dissemination to educate people and help them understand why these things are important to think about.
That's fantastic. And I think that's a good point to wrap up, really, unless you have any final words for our audience.
Not at all. I apologize for my cats being a menace during this recording.
Feline presence. I was just talking to my first years about the debates about the domestication of felines, and then, of course, some of them were catching on. Not that I'm an expert in cats, but catching on to my answer is, well, when were they ever? You know, I don't know. The cat owners, if you have opinions on this, but
I would say they choose to be domesticated or not on a day-to-day basis.
It changes by the day, right? Okay.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Grace. It's been a real pleasure, and we'll put all the contacts you want to share and any links to relevant sites in the description of the video, so people know where to find you if you want to be found, and you know, and all that. But for now, it's been a real joy, but also an eye opener thinking about, you know, these medievalisms and regional identity, legends, myths, to tourism, all mashing up. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.
If you've enjoyed this Archaeodeath video, why not check out the Archaeodeath blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.